Welcome back to STEMConnect Global. In our last explainer, we traveled back in time to the muddy streets of London and saw how epidemiology was born thanks to the brilliant detective work of Jon Snow.
Today, we're taking it a step further. We're moving from what epidemiology is to why it matters so much. Because, if epidemiology is the science of finding patterns, its real power, well, that lies in how we use those patterns to protect lives, to guide policy, and to stop disease before it even gets a chance to start.
So, here's our game plan. First, we'll look through epidemiology's wide lens. Then, we'll open up the public health toolkit. After that, we'll connect the dots from data to daily life. And finally, we'll see how it all comes together, moving from patterns to prevention. Ready? Let's dive in. All right, Section 1, Epidemiology's Wide Lens. I really want to drive this point home because this field is about so much more than just the next big outbreak you see on the news.
So what does it actually study today? I mean, if you're picturing scientists in lab coats chasing down a virus, you're not wrong. But honestly, you're only seeing a tiny piece of the puzzle. The reality is just so much bigger.
The modern scope of epidemiology is, well, it's vast. We're talking about the study of pretty much anything that affects the well-being of a community. That includes everything from car accidents and mental health trends to hazards in the workplace and even how misinformation spreads online. You can kind of break it down into 4 main pillars. Of course, you've got diseases, both the infectious kind, like the flu, and non-infectious ones, like diabetes. But then you also have health-related events, things like suicides or addictions. And this next one is absolutely crucial: the determinants of health. These are the social and economic factors that shape our lives. For instance, how does air pollution in a city lead to higher asthma rates in kids? That's an epidemiology question. And finally, it looks at our health services to figure out if they're actually working.
So now we know what they study. Let's jump into Section 2 and look at how they do it. Let's open up the Public Health Toolkit.
I absolutely love this analogy. Think of epidemiology as a detective agency for public health. And like any good detective, it has a specific set of tools it uses to investigate, analyze, and ultimately solve health mysteries. Let's take a look at some of the most important ones. First off, they study the natural history of a disease. By tracing its typical journey, like you see here with tuberculosis, they can find the absolute perfect moment to step in. Knowing these stages, from exposure to active disease, is precisely why we have screening tools like chest x-rays or skin tests. They're designed to catch the problem at just the right time to be most effective. Next, they identify causes and risk factors. This is classic detective work, connecting the dots. When you link a cause, like smoking, to an effect, like lung cancer, you create the fundamental knowledge we need for prevention. Think about it. Quit smoking campaigns, dietary guidelines, water purification systems, they all started with this kind of evidence.
But how do you measure the health of an entire community? It's tricky. That's where a metric like dailies, or disability-adjusted life years, comes into play. Basically, you can think of one daily as one lost year of healthy life. It's an incredibly powerful tool because it doesn't just count deaths, it also counts the years people spend living with a disability. This gives policymakers a much clearer picture of where to put resources to make the biggest difference. And this is a perfect example of one of the most vital uses, evaluating whether our health programs are actually working. I mean, how do we know a multi-million-dollar vaccination campaign is worth it? Epidemiologists gives us the proof. In Pakistan, after they rolled out the hepatitis B vaccine, epidemiologists compared infection rates from before and after. The result? They proved it cut new cases by more than half. That is data turning directly into life-saving policy. And the toolkit doesn't stop there, not by a long shot. This data drives strategy at every single level. It's used for planning where to build new maternal care units, for modeling the future rise of diabetes, and for providing the foundational evidence for things like clinical trials and vaccine development. It's really the engine humming behind the scenes of modern medicine. Okay, so we've covered the what and the how. Now let's connect it all to the big one, why it matters to you. In our third section, we're going from data to daily life to see where all these big ideas meet the real world. Because, these days, epidemiology is a real team sport. It's not just doctors and statisticians anymore. Now you have data scientists using machine learning to spot patterns, sociologists explaining how our culture affects health, economists calculating the true cost of disease, and environmental scientists linking the health of our planet directly to our own. Let's see this team in action.
How about a quick fire round? First up, road safety. Epidemiologists are the ones digging into all that accident data, the where, the when, the why, and that analysis, it directly leads to safer road designs and better traffic laws for all of us.
Next up, maternal health. When we see high mortality rates in rural areas, that's not just a statistic, it's a call to action. That data is what leads to targeted programs, like deploying more midwives or improving emergency transport, which directly saves mothers' lives.
And what about our really modern challenges? Yep, epidemiologist is on it. Those studies linking heavy social media use to depression in young people, that's the evidence that's now being used to create new mental health support programs right inside our schools. And finally, maybe the biggest challenge of them all, climate change. Well, epidemiologists are on the front lines, mapping how rising temperatures are literally expanding the zones where malaria can thrive and tracking the increase in deaths from heat stroke. They're providing the hard evidence that this is a direct threat to our health. Which brings us to our final section, from patterns to prevention. Let's tie all of these threads together and get right to the core of why this field is just so essential. I think this quote from our source just says it all perfectly. The goal isn't simply to collect a bunch of data and describe a problem. The whole point is to use that data to define a direction, to tell us what we should focus on, where we need to act, and how we can tell if we're actually making progress. So if you remember just one thing from this explainer, please make it this simple 3-step process. First, epidemiology describes what's happening. Second, it explains why it's happening. And third, and this is the most important part, it uses that knowledge to try and prevent it from ever happening again. Describe, explain, prevent. That is the essence of its power.
And at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. It's about empowering everyone, from students to researchers to policymakers, with the tools to make better, smarter decisions. Because the bottom line is so simple, yet so profound. When we can measure health, we can change it.
In our next chapter, we're going to get even more practical. We'll explore the measures of disease frequency, the specific tools we use to actually put a number on health and illness. I really hope you'll join me for that.